Guten Morgen, mein Name ist Knut Neumeier und im Namen der Erste-Stiftung möchte ich Sie sehr herzlich begrüßen bei einer weiteren Veranstaltung der Reihe Debating Europe. Ich vertrete hier nicht nur die Erste-Stiftung, sondern auch alle weiteren Kooperationspartner, die da wären IWM, Institut Wissenschaften vom Menschen, der Standard und das Burgtheater. Die Frage der heutigen Runde, der Staat und die Krise, wird von der Erste-Stiftung immer wieder mit einer Stärkung der Zivilgesellschaft beantwortet. Zum Beispiel ein großer Award for Social Integration, der jedes zweite Jahr in 12 Ländern Zentral- und Südosteuropas stattfindet und mit 600.000 € jedes Jahr eine Vielzahl von sozialen Initiativen unterstützt. Ein zweites Beispiel ist Academy of Central European Schools, ein Netzwerk von Schulen in 15 Ländern Zentral- und Südosteuropas, bei dem jedes Jahr mehrere tausend Schülerinnen und Schüler die Chance bekommen, in andere Länder zu reisen, mit anderen Jugendlichen zusammen Projekte durchzuführen zu zivilgesellschaftlichen Themen. Bei der letzten Runde hier auf diesen Brettern hat Kardinal Schönborn gemeint, das sei eine säkuläre Sonntagsliturgie. Er hat zwar dann nicht gepredigt, das hat er Heiner Geisler überlassen. Ich bin schon sehr gespannt, ob heute eine Ansprache der Piraten kommt oder wer heute den Predigtdienst übernimmt. Wer heute moderieren wird, wird Ihnen mein Kollege vom IWM vorstellen. Herzlichen guten Morgen noch einmal und danke, dass Sie da sind.
Good morning. My name is Krzysztof Michalski and I represent one of the partner institutions organizing this event, actually this series of events, which is the Institute for Human Sciences. The discussion today is one of a very long series. The series of public debates we started here in Vienna in order to contribute maybe modestly to the public debate, introducing perspectives or topics perhaps not so present as they are worth to be. If we've been successful, this is not for us to say, but to you. So we will continue today with the topic hotly debated on both sides of the Atlantic, of the role of the public in society. A topic hotly debated in particular today because of economic and financial crisis. The topic will be introduced under the debate moderated by Ivan Krastev, permanent fellow of the Institute for Human Sciences. I'm a Bulgarian who came to the West several years ago. And one of the first, if not the first, intellectual institutions in the West he saw was the Institute for Human Sciences. And since then, his career developed. He became one of the leading commentators and analysts of public and particularly political life on both sides of the Atlantic. So I'm proud that he will play this role today. Thank you very much, and Ivan will take over.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. And after this very nice introduction by Professor Michalski, I feel slightly also embarrassed how I'm going to represent these really famous people who are on the panel. But we are going to discuss about the crisis and the state. And I do believe this is an interesting topic because if you read the papers these days, there are some that claim that the crisis is over, and there are others that claim that the state is over. And both of them could be right. But after two days' discussions of the problem of the impact of the crisis on the way our social life is developing, what's happening with our democracies, we have four really distinguished speakers on this panel. And I'll start with Katherine Newman, who is on my right. If you're going to ask the question, what is the common between the most famous American universities, I mean Columbia, Princeton, Johns Hopkins University, Harvard, Berkeley, the common is that she has been teaching in all of them. And she's really the leading American social scientist when it comes to the problem of the poverty and working poor. And now when all this social problematics is back at the center debate, I'm very happy that you're here. If you go on my left, and I should tell you that the left and the right does not have here the usual meaning, otherwise you cannot have the far right being represented in the way it is. Lilia Shevtsova is the most distinguished expert on post-communist Russia and one of the leading thinkers on democracy. For years, she has been among the 100 most influential intellectuals on the foreign policy list of the public intellectuals. And she is one of the directors of the Carnegie Endowment, International Institute in Moscow and Washington, and she is associated with the Chatham House in London, and she's even not hiding her association with the Davos Forum, where he's one of the leading expert personality. And I do believe this is extremely important, not simply because of what's happening in Russia these days, but because of the fact that, in a way, Russia is teaching us very much what can happen in the world as a whole. And then, if you go on my far left, you're going to see the real winners of the crisis, the new protest movement, and Christopher Lauer is one of the leaders of the Pirate Party in Germany, and he's member now of the Berlin Parliament. And I do believe that there is a huge interest now in public in general what these new forces represent, what they stand for. They're now real political players. By the way, for those who are interested, the last year, the government of Sweden registered a new religion. And this new religion is called Copism. And it was registered by one of the activists of the Pirate Party. And their two holy figures are cut and paste these commands of the computer. So basically, you have the pirates being represented here. And on my far right, there is somebody whom I don't need to represent here, Alfred Gusenbauer, the former chancellor of Austria. But for us, it was also very important that now he's one of the key figures in also European and American public and intellectual debates. He's teaching in Harvard, he's teaching in Brown University. So he's invited here much more in his capacity of a thinker and somebody who reflects on what's going on, also based on his experience in politics. So I want to start with Kathy, and my question is the following. Many things are happening as a result of the crisis, but many things have been happening even before the crisis we simply did not discuss. The rise of the social inequality is a phenomenon for the last 20 years. It didn't happen in the last 3 years. All the problem of who are the really new vulnerable groups, for example, the problem of the crisis and the white male Americans and educated male Americans, what's happening there. Can you tell us what's really happening on the social level and to what extent this crisis changed the way we're thinking about what's happening in our societies? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? Who are the winners in the short term and who are the losers on the long term? Because seen from Europe, we have a strange situation in which you have the feeling that we have a societies in which the young people do not have a chance to have a job. And basically, the old people do not have a chance to get a pension. And this is a difficult balance. So how it looks from America?
Well, thank you very much. Let me begin by thanking the sponsors, Der Standard, the ESTA Foundation, and especially the Institute for Human Sciences. I believe this is my 5th visit to Vienna for the conference that precedes this conversation that the Institute sponsors. It's an absolutely invaluable treasure to Austria and to those of us who come from far away to participate in these conversations. So let me try to answer your very ambitious question. It is absolutely the case that inequality has been growing in the United States and indeed in the Western industrial democracies since the mid-1970s. So this is a problem of enormous dimensions. It has exacerbated a series of social problems that have become much more difficult during the crisis, but it is not a feature of the crisis. It is a long-term consequence of the oil problems, the dependence on foreign oil, on educational inequality, on technological developments that have made it difficult for those who are low-skilled to prosper in an economy that demands higher education. So these are some secular trends that have been in play for a long time. But let me speak for a moment about the crisis itself, at least as it's manifested in the United States, and I think to a large degree here in Europe as well. So first, of course, we see high and persistent unemployment. Particularly problematic is long-term unemployment. And this is problematic not only because of the suffering that it induces for those who are on the outside of the world of work, but for the scarring effects that it produces. People who've been out of work for more than 6 months, and now we're looking at people who've been out of work for 2 or 3 years, have a very difficult time re-entering the labor market even when it recovers. So we are very concerned about what this will mean in terms of persistent effects even when the economy recovers. As you mentioned, this is particularly a problem for young people. We are seeing the emergence of a lost generation that may never have the opportunity to develop a normal pathway through the labor market. We saw this the last time in the Great Depression, and the generation that entered the labor market during the 1930s actually never did recover fully, even when employment was roaring. They had a long-term, persistent loss of wages. They didn't marry at the same rate. They never were able to assemble the kind of normal life that had been known before or that came to be known afterwards. So high and persistent unemployment is a problem for many reasons, not only income in households, but the social dislocations that follow from being outside the one truly universal experience that binds us together, that of being commonly in the workforce. Other problems that have developed, especially in the United States, but we're seeing this elsewhere as well, is the evaporation of wealth through the foreclosure crisis. You're probably aware that in the United States, this crisis began in the housing markets with the bursting of a housing bubble. Housing is where most Americans have their wealth. They don't have big bank accounts, but they have housing equity. And the evaporation of housing equity is extraordinarily serious. It means it will take generations for them to recover from this loss. And because Americans in a relatively weak welfare state finance much of their retirement, their children's education, and other kinds of benefits that are here created by the social state, the evaporation of that wealth has created an enormous problem of mobility. If families cannot borrow against their houses to finance their children's education, their children will not have higher education. This is an enormous problem for us. Crisis economics has also meant the emergence of a narrative about debt and deficit that has been very pronounced and very persistent in our politics. And this has put certain kinds of sacred cows that we do care about a great deal, Medicare, the financing of old age health care, Social Security, the sustainability of these vital institutions, which for us is the only kind of safety net we have, has really been put to the test, to the question, because of these concerns about debt and deficit. We're now seeing the emergence of a true fiscal crisis of the states, and by the states I mean our 50 states, as they have lost revenue and have balanced budget amendments in their constitutions. We are seeing a vast reduction of services to children, services to the elderly, educational services, welfare services. The states are slashing public servants, public employees, in order to balance their budgets. Withdrawal of investment from higher education. We have one of the best public education systems in the world, but it is no longer really financed by the public, as they have been withdrawing support from higher education from the state, and increasingly then, the universities are jacking up tuition in order to make up the difference. This is making it much harder for talented students who come from families of low means, of lower income, to achieve higher education. Shifting the burden of human capital accumulation to households and away from the government. This, I think, is the most important message I would like to contribute. In the United States, what we see here is the emergence of the family, of the household, as the ultimate shock absorber in the crisis. But there are limits to what families can do. There are limits to what they can absorb. At the moment, though, we are seeing the emergence of what I call the accordion family, the family that must expand to include and retain its young people for years and years longer than it used to in order to provide them support in the evaporation of their labor market opportunities. We are seeing bankrupt municipalities, so the politics of local government is shifting as municipalities find that they haven't got the tax income they need to run themselves, and they are literally going bankrupt and handing themselves over to state government. So I think all the way around we have a series of problems that are resulting in the private sphere absorbing the shock of the crisis, because in many ways government has abandoned its responsibilities for regulation and for distributing the consequences and costs of maintaining a society in which there is any semblance of equal opportunity. This has the greatest effect on youth and on the elders. So youth are unable to find employment. This is a problem in the US, it's a catastrophe in Spain, it's a catastrophe in many other parts of Europe. And the forcing of the elderly back into the labor market as they discover their Social Security pensions are not sufficient for them to survive. So I think I will stop there with this litany of critical issues, but I appreciate the opportunity to address the audience.
We started on a very optimistic note. But going to Lilia, when the crisis started in 2008, there were two schools of thought. And one of them said, this crisis is going to be a real crisis for the emerging democracies. And most of the people started to remember 1930s, what happened with the Great Depression. Everybody was shocked with, for example, the collapse of the GDP in some of the Baltic republics. Everybody was saying, it's over, very extreme parties are going to come, people are not going to live with austerity. On one level, this did not happen. And the Baltics not simply basically managed to preserve their democratic system, they even re-elected some of the governments that introduced these painful policies. But on the other, if you see the latest development in the European Union, people are asking a legitimate question. How democratic places like Greece or Italy are today? And who is really firing and appointing the governments? Is this the voters? Or is this the financial markets? And this is these concerns going there. After that, there was a different school of thought who said this is the end of the authoritarian regimes. And especially when the Arab Spring came, it became a very strong message that in the time of the economic crisis, the traditional autocratic regimes are not doing well because they have nothing to offer to the people. But I do believe all this crystallized very much in the dilemmas that we see in Russia these days. And when people went on the streets in December 4, unexpectedly to many, it looked as if the democratic version of the impact of the crisis was going up. And now we see the results of the elections, and basically we see the decline of the protest activity in Russia in the last days. So the problem is, what is this trend? If you're going to look on the experience of Russia, what is this dynamics between democracy, authoritarianism? Who is winning, who is gaining, and to even more radical, to what extent this is not the disappearing border between democracy and authoritarianism that is one of the features these days. So I'm very much interested how you're going to read.
Well, Ivan, thank you for the at least 5 or 6 questions. I will try to get the ball rolling, but first of all, can I follow up on what Katherine mentioned at the beginning? I would like to express my thanks, first of all, to Krzysztof Michalski and the Institute for Human Sciences, to the newspaper Der Standard, and I would like to express my gratitude to the audience, because it seems to me there are not so many places in the world when people are coming to listen about the crisis on Sunday. And in any case, I definitely know that if we start to discuss either glorious collapse of Russian Revolution or glorious victory, we have a place to start our debate. And briefly on the points, on the questions that you raised, it seems to me that Russia's awakening could be really true and not an imitation only in one case, if you folks solve your own problems. I just can't imagine the victory of democracy in the country that still is the polar or the pillar of the authoritarian world, and of a very tumultuous, very chaotic, unpredictable zone, if Europe still is discussing the question what democracy is. And a couple of comments responding to you and to Katherine. This is Katherine that, in fact, forces me to underline one fact or one point. For me, very puzzling even. Because if I remember correctly, the newest history, we never had in the European world and Russian history, this is very strange, weird, idiotic crisis dance of two hostile civilizations. On the one hand, Europe and the West. On the other hand, Russia. We are hostile. We are alien. We never did this dance together. Never. Just on the contrary. Every European crisis and crisis of the liberal democracy and Western civilization always strengthened the old traditional Russia or the Soviet Union. And collapse and weakness of Russia and the Soviet Union has always been followed by crescendo of the liberal democracy. Remember 1981. So what has happened now? And even the symptoms that Katherine has been mentioning, the symptoms of the crisis in the United States, the only remaining superpower, resemble very much the symptoms of crisis in Russia. We have nearly the same, and even, tentatively, we have the same losers and winners, which says a lot not only about our society, it seems, but it says a lot of unpleasant things about the Western society. And, by the way, it says a lot about our potential optimism, because having such an external environment, we are doomed with our awakening. And let me switch to another point. I've been listening to an absolutely wonderful conference these 2 days, where the best of the best, the cream of the European and Western political science and social science have been discussing the crisis, and they rejoiced me. They made me happy. You know why? Because, the discussion proved that we shouldn't demonize crisis. Crisis, I don't want to be provocative or weird or reckless, but I just can't imagine change without crisis. I've been reading a lot about the 70s, and it seems to me that rhetoric, remember the Carter's malaise, etc. It seems to me you thought, folks, even in the United States, that you were doomed. And then, the end of 70s. It was totally new America and totally new Europe. And Helsinki basket, for the first time, the normative dimension, the values, have been included in the analysis and approach of the West towards the international relations. And such a backtracking now. So, at least for Russia, crisis is good. Crisis in Russia means that Russia still is alive, because rot, stagnation, atrophy that we've been living until recently, this is the worst possible scenario. Now the crisis looks like a fever, which says that this patient is still alive, it's stirring, and maybe even he will find some rescue or recipe or solution and will stand up. And third point, the crisis. You're absolutely right, Ivan, asking this question, winners and losers. This crisis in Russia is the crisis of imitation that both Russian elite and Western elite, Mr. Putin, Yeltsin, and the rest, and Mr. Schroeder and the West, Daimler-Benz, Siemens, Raiffeisen Bank, etc., folks on your side have been participating. We all have been participating in the game Let's Pretend. So we have the crisis of this game Let's Pretend. Not only the crisis of authoritarian power, of personalist power, but the crisis of the game Let's Pretend, which narrows the field for maneuver not only for the Russian political regime, but also for your cynical establishment. And the final point, maybe I will raise it later, but just a thought. Unfortunately, Ivan, you're right. The tide in Russia is subsiding, and it resembles the mechanism of tsunami. When the first tide subsides, then lull, the second tide is coming, then the third, until tsunami raises. So in Russia, we had the first December protest tide is over. So we are now waiting for the second, for the third, and it definitely no one in Moscow will bet, nobody will bet and risk a bottle of champagne, trying to argue that Putin and the regime will stay through 2018. No one, you'll never find anyone, it seems to me, even around the Kremlin. But still, this regime has the field for maneuver. Not only the oil price, but also the acquiescence, the appeasement of the Western civilization. And when the tide comes, it could be a very dramatic and bloody process in Russia, because the history of change and transformation does not have any evidence of how to deal with the nuclear superpower, the member of the Security Council, and the polar in the huge space that divides Russia from the rising China. And of course, it will be a challenge for us, and it will take a lot of sacrifice. But it will be also a challenge for you folks.
Thank you very much. And it's great that the patient is alive. The only problem is does the doctor knows what to do.
It's good to know who's the doctor.
And going to Christopher, because I very much agree with you, the crisis always was an opportunity. And by the way, one of the Greek meaning of the word crisis was an opportunity.
Yes.
And part of the opportunity was coming from the new civic energy, new ideas that the crisis is bringing in. And from this point of view, for me, one of the most interesting questions is how to read the new protest politics. And Christopher is one of the representatives of this protest politics. And to make the life even more difficult for you, let's put it like this. They have two different readings. One is, we all like people on the street, especially when they're not on the street of your own town. So basically, you look, they're young, they use internet, they're smiling, especially when they talk to the journalists. But the basic question is, what kind of new ideas and new understanding of politics is coming with? It's true for the Occupy movement, but I do believe Pirate Party is much more interesting because you entered institutions.
Yeah.
All others are talking. And secondly, what you really want to change. To what extent democracy is now about changing policies, about changing institutions, or it's only about changing personnel? And from this point of view, I'm very much interested in how you read the crisis and your role in it.
Yeah, first of all, let me also thank that I have the opportunity here to share some thoughts on the crisis. I feel at the moment, I feel a little bit like at the beginning titles of Star Wars when they're coming up these characters and say, oh, the Empire strikes back and they have this big battle station and they want to destroy everything. It was not very, very optimistic what came here. So, but when I think about the crisis, I think now the generation which is active in the Pirate Party and wants to make policy, they experienced the crisis since they were born. I mean, it started not like in 2008 with the crisis in the US. I mean, we had in Germany the reunification, which wasn't like a crisis, but there was a big euphoric. But afterwards, in the 90s, we had a big unemployment in Germany. So when we went to school, everybody said, oh yeah, you won't have a job like your parents when they were getting an education and then working for 40 years somewhere. So we were told, yeah, you have to be flexible and so on and so on. So you have a good education. And then in 1999, we had a crisis, but I already forgot what it was about. And then in 2001, I guess we had the dot-com bubble exploding and everything. Then we had 9/11, which was another crisis. I think in 2005, we had an economic crisis too. So there was crisis, and we don't have the feeling that there is like real opportunity. On the other hand, we are now a generation, I mean, like the average age of the pirates is like in Germany like 30 years. We are, in terms of other parties, our own youth organization. And yeah, you are laughing, but it's true. I mean, and that's quite funny. I mean, like when the guys who built the atomic bomb, they were like between 25 and 32. So when I make a joke, I say this is our atomic bomb. But the thing is, we were raised with the internet, and this is a big game changer, I think, because the thing we experience in the internet is quite a different thing than like in the real life. So what I don't know, like the American dream, what what was a common thought in the States which motivated the people to do something. I mean, it's maybe true in the internet because you have a neutral platform, and if you want to do something, you can do it. If you want to start a Wikipedia, you can make a Wikipedia. If you want to do something like eBay, you can do it. You have infinite opportunity, and then you experience the real world, and you see you have no opportunity. So what the pirates are basically doing in Germany, or maybe worldwide, is try to implement, and I'm using this technical term, to implement some of the physics of the internet, like this neutrality to society. And that would be like the opportunity if we would be able, with our policy, to change society in that way. But on the other hand, there's also not the fear. There could be the outcome that only the personal is changed. That I want to be honest with that. We are not better because we are younger or something like that. I guess what we experience now at the moment is, due to the internet, a lot of paradigms of the 19th and 20th century are destroyed, and the internet doesn't care. So what is work? What is knowledge in the 21st century? What do I need for an education when I'm be able to tap all information via my mobile phone, or I have internet everywhere? So that's quite interesting, and I guess what happened worldwide in 2011 is that this generation, which was raised with the internet, not only in Europe and the Western society, but also in North Africa, they tried to claim their place in society. And in the societies which were a little bit, which were fluent, like in Germany, we were able to enter the parliament, and now maybe have the opportunity to change something from within. In other states, which were like dictatorships, like in North Africa, the peoples had to go on the streets and make a revolution with, I hope, a good outcome for these. So, and now when I'm experiencing politics from the inside, from the parliament, I guess one big problem is that, like the executive, the bureaucracy, it's too strong. I mean, basically, we are 149 members of parliament in the city-state of Berlin, and if we wanted to paint every building in Berlin pink, we would just make a law and then it should be done. But we are not using our that's maybe a silly example, but we are not using our free mandate, which we have, because what happens is, there is the need of a new law, so the government says, we need a new law be written, and it's not written in parliament by the parliamentarians, it's written somewhere in the bureaucracy, and then the bureaucracy gives it to the government gives it to the parliament, and you have the coalition, and then like a social aspect kicks in, because the members of the parties, they won't oppose their own party because they want to make career into this party. They want to be maybe mayor or senator, which is like a minister in Berlin, or they want to make career. So you have play by the rules, and there is like no. I guess one funny thing, there hasn't only. We don't need the revolution by the people, but also a revolution by the parliamentarians inside of the parliament to reclaim the opportunities they have. And I guess like this Occupy movement in Germany, of course, they have now a problem because the pirates are into the parliament, and everybody says, why are you protesting when there is another very young party in the parliament and trying to change something? And one last thought, I guess we need to use the big opportunity which the internet gives us to allow more participation of the people within the parliament, which is quite strange because normally you should think, why are people interested in politics? I mean, it's a highly efficient system. If a state with 3.5 million, if a city with 3.5 million people is represented by 149 people in the parliament, that's quite efficient. Why are people who are thinking that energy is coming out of the socket and money out of the ATM, why should they be interested in making politics? So there is a big distrust in the political class in being able to solve all these problems. And we are now confronted with that. And it's on the one side amazing because we can try to change something. And on the other side, we are seeing now it's such a huge system and we have to, it will get hard.
Thanks a lot. So now we know that the patient is alive and that he's going to cure himself through searching in Google. But this is what most of the Bulgarians do these days anyway. But I do believe that this idea that internet is going to be the model for participatory democratic politics is interesting because participation is very important. But you can have a very participant type of a decision which does not need to be good on the other side. So from this point of view, I'll move very much, and of course we kept you for the end, because you have this great experience being on different sides, taking decisions, advising people on decisions. I remember when Kissinger went to the White House, he wrote the following. He said, when I was in Harvard, I was writing all these memos to the government, and nobody was taking me seriously. And I was furious. And then I went to the government, and I understood very simple things. That there are two types of good ideas. One that could be implemented, and the others that could not be implemented. And the good ideas that could be implemented, they're already known in the administrations. And the others doesn't matter. So from this point of view, you're there. But I have two very specific questions. One is Austria is a nice place. You have 4% unemployment. You know that there is a crisis. You can talk about it. I don't have the feeling how strongly you're experiencing it. But on the other side, this is what the governments really can do. And especially my second question is with the social democratic parties. If my calculation is right, after the crisis, there were 25 parliamentary elections in Europe. Social Democrats succeeded to lose 20 of them. One of the explanations is that you were not running. But if we're going to get out of this, do you believe that this crisis in a certain way is going to put an end to a strong social democratic consensus in Europe? What is going to be the future for the social democratic governance?
Seems to be a little bit more than two questions. Well, first of all, I think one of the basic changes that is taking place also in the appreciation of the public is that politics in the social democrat understanding was balancing or correcting markets. And this is also the core of the social democrat consensus that is going far beyond social democrat parties. I mean, liberals and Christian Democrats and conservatives might differ on the extent of the intervention, but basically the social democratic consensus is to balance or at least correct markets. And now people get the impression that the decisions that really affect them are not anymore taken by elected parliaments or governments, but decisions are taken somewhere in the anonymity of the financial markets. And it seems that as a result of the crisis, politics has not gained by having a stronger mandate in order to correct or to balance markets. Quite the contrary. Politics nowadays in Europe is basically about how we are able to balance our state budgets and how we are able to implement the austerity measures all across the continent. And it seems to be that we are again entering a new period of Tina politics. There is no alternative, which is also not very thrilling for the democratic process, because democracy is about choice. And if people have the understanding that there is no real choice, because to a certain extent, objectively, all these measures have to be implemented. In one country, tougher ones, in other less, and with a better influence on income distribution or a worse one, but in general, it seems that there is no alternative. By the way, there could be periods in the history of politics where there is really no alternative, and it would not be the first one. I mean, after 1989, there was no real alternative in Central and Eastern Europe. I mean, countries were going to democracy, to pluralism, to market economy, liberalizing and opening up. And the different parties that were running for support had their internal differentiations on those issues. But as a basic concept, there was no choice, no alternative. This was the way to go. So I just mentioned that because sometimes a no alternative policy is also appreciated quite positively, because there was also a broad consensus behind that move. Nowadays, I think it has two effects. The one effect is that many parties in such a situation think, okay, the market is not really the winning place for politics anymore. So we are moving away from the traditional concept, which is to balance or to correct markets. And we are now playing the game of identity politics, which is a completely different arena. And when you mentioned that Social Democrats were not so enormously successful recently, this also has to do with this shift of the platform, because Social Democrats can be quite successful when the issue is the balancing or the correction of the markets, but with identity politics, it's much more difficult. There are much more outspoken, clear-cut, also radical forces that are playing better on that ground. And the second problem is, of course, that very often Social Democrats give the wrong answers to the wrong questions. No? I mean, what we hear now as a result of the crisis is that all those who were responsible for the crisis are the ones that should pay now for the crisis. It's a very interesting concept. My question is, was Lionel Messi responsible for the crisis? Definitely not. But if you're looking to the policies that are now implemented, which of course ask the wealthier people in the society to take a larger share of what is necessary in order to balance public budgets, it's obvious that those that can afford more should contribute more. But this doesn't mean that they were responsible for the crisis. It's a complete misperception to say that those that might be wealthier nowadays were the ones that are responsible for the crisis. This indicates an entire lack of economic analysis, because the reasons for the crisis and the bubbles and what Katherine mentioned, that for a long time, for instance, in the United States, with decreasing national incomes, I mean, social policy was mainly taken over by the Federal Reserve Bank. No? I mean, that was the tool to maintain a certain equilibrium in the society. Well, at the end of the day, sooner or later, it has to burst, as most of the bubbles do. And this is not only true for the US, but also for some parts of Europe, of course. I mean, in Spain, it was nice to have 5-6% growth rate, but for a long time. But on what was it based? On construction bubble and on excessive consumption that was not at all based on the competitiveness on the country, on the industrial substance, etc. So sooner or later, you have to pay the bill. And I think a systematic understanding of what have been the real reasons for the crisis maybe does not lead to very popular consequences. And therefore, again, we are moving away from correcting or balancing the markets to identity politics. And this traditionally has not been the strength of social democrats. Nevertheless, I think there is some progress happening, even if we do not understand that as progress, at least in the given moment of time. It's true that Europe is growing together. Measures that were taken nowadays to answer the crisis wouldn't have been possible several years ago. And what we have is a new type, an unusual type of integration. The integration is not done via the European institutions, like the European Commission or the European Parliament. The integration is done via the national governments, because they are the ones that agree nowadays on all the packages and the measures and the umbrellas, etc., etc. Very often not really in accordance with the treaties, bypassing the European Parliament and the European Commission. And their argument always is, well, due to the lack of time, we cannot afford these odd democratic processes going through parliaments, etc., etc. We have to do it right now. This is a possibility for a limited amount of time. Because if all these measures that are taken right now are not based on democratic legitimation, the game will be over quite soon. Because the basis of democracy is that, again, people want to be involved in one way or the other in decisions that at the end of the day, they affect them or they have to bear. And therefore, if what happens right now is not complemented by a democratization of the political system of the European Union, it ends up in economic dictatorship. Because if people that I have not elected are taking decisions that are quite far-reaching, and they are then just implemented and copied by the parliaments at home, where is then my democratic right? And if you see which amount of decisions is already not taken here in Vienna or in Berlin or in Paris, but it's taken by the European Council in Brussels or wherever they meet, then I have to say it's not acceptable that democracy is eroded by the transfer of competences away from the levels where I really have a say. And therefore, we are either continuing as we are, then I think we will face similar turbulences as they are in other parts of the world, because people more and more experience the present Brussels rule as a type of authoritarian regime, where they do not have a say. So either this changes, and we take the new type of integration on the level of democratic elections, then it's fine. If not, the crisis will be even tougher than it has been before. And therefore, I think you can read the present situation in two ways. You can say, okay, for the time being, there is more cooperation, but less democracy. But if this more cooperation is complemented by more democracy, it could move forward on a different and on a better level. And one thing is very interesting, because it's reaffirming our thoughts. And it's also reaffirming the role of the financial markets. You do not need elections anymore to get rid of a government. I mean, the Greek government, the Italian government, they were driven out by the markets. They were not driven out by general elections. And I do not know how many manifestations were organized against Mr. Berlusconi, with millions and millions of participants over years. It was not possible to get him out of office. Financial markets, who up to a certain moment said, no more money for this type of government, really produced the change. And again, there are two possibilities in Italy nowadays too. You have for a time being a so-called technocratic government that is the representative of there is no alternative politics. If this is a limited period of time and then moves into a new situation where there are democratic choices again, could have a very positive and stabilizing effect. So to wrap it up, you could read our situation now from a defeatist attitude. Then it's better we go to the Gasthaus and drink a glass of wine, because it's the normal Viennese attitude to overcome problems. Or you read it in the positive way and try to see where there is the progressive potential to move to a better, more democratic political system. And I belong to the second.
Thank you. Listen, at least 30 minutes stay here before going for the wine, because we're going to have more of a debate. But I very much agree with you about there is no alternative policies. And even more, if we try to radicalize, you can see two different versions of there is no alternative politics. One you can see very much in European Union, where with the constitutionalization of a certain economic decision-making, the message is there is no policy alternative. So you can change governments as much as you want. By the way, as quickly as you want. And then basically the democracy is going to be very much about changing the people who are governing. They're not touching on policies. On the other side, if you go to countries like Russia and China, you're going to see another version of there is no alternative. Here there is no political alternative. People in power said we're ready to change economic policies under the conditions that you're not going to change us. And if you see on the level of the economic decision-making, especially the Chinese, who are more sophisticated, during these 3 or 4 years, they have been trying different things to see what's going to be better for them. I very much agree with you that now there is an opportunity, and for Europe, either it will go for a much more political integration, or it can go for a kind of a situation which is difficult to understand. But Christopher, I'll go to you. There is no alternative. You're coming and saying we are the alternative. Where, for example, the pirates stay on things like European Union now, for example, all the new fiscal compact policies, do you have a position on this? Do you support? Do you not support? How are you going to reconcile your very strong push for participation of the citizens with this new reality, which is there? Yeah. In a certain way, the rallies organized by the dollars is stronger than the rallies organized by the citizens, as we see in the case of Italy.
That's a good thing. First of all, I wanted to say I was 1 year in China, and it's there's always this discussion and more in a joke, but isn't that maybe more attractive because they are so successful? I can assure you they aren't, because you have a lot of rich people, but you have even more and more people who are treated not very nice by the government, and it's like more a state institutionalized mafia or something like that. Coming to how the pirates want to change something, well, first of all, that's a funny thing. During our campaign, the people come to us on the street when we campaigned and said, we don't expect too much from you, just bring some fresh wind into the parliament, and that was quite surprising that the expectations to a new party are so low. To the euro, that's one point at the Pirate Party where we say at the moment, okay, we just have no alternative, no concept, but we are saying that openly, which is quite surprising for the public in Germany and even for the media. They feel like, not taken serious if we say, hey, that's a little bit too big for us at the moment. In case of let people participate, we have alternatives. We are using very heavily in our own party a system which is called liquid feedback, which is following the concept of liquid democracy, which is basically a computer program via the internet which lets you shift between direct democracy and representative democracy. So if you want to do everything in this system alone, you can do, but if you know some experts, you can delegate to them. And then the delegations are summing up, so the system is quite naturally searching for experts. And that's quite interesting because then everybody in this system has like the opportunity, the equal opportunity to make some suggestions for policies, and afterwards we go to our, we have an assembly, and then we will vote on that in real life. And of course you could implement such a system directly in a city like Berlin and let the people participate, or just tapping the knowledge. I mean, we are in the parliament, we are in the bubble, the experts are in the bubble, and maybe somebody out there has like a really good idea when it comes to a problem, and then the people could participate again. But let me say one thing to this technocratic approach we have at the moment, and I guess that has something to do with like also the distribution of responsibility. I have the feeling nobody in politics, and that is even a problem in the Pirate Party, nobody is willing to take like a political responsibility. I mean, a very good, simple example of that was we had in Duisburg, we had the Love Parade. And 21 people died in that because of bad planning, but everybody was right. They asked the police said, yeah, it was, the firefighter said it's okay, the firefighter said, yeah, but the mayor said it's okay, the mayor said, my expert said everything is okay, everybody was okay, nobody was responsible, but still there were 21 people dead. So the thing, what politics had to do, in my opinion, when the system worked better, was to make decisions which were not right, where you couldn't see the outcome, but where the politicians said, we are now taking the responsibility with our decision and think if we do that, we think that there will be an outcome which is good for all, or which will fit in our political agenda. At the moment, you always try, let me say it in that way, to cover up your ass. So when you make a fiscal pact or something like that, nobody would say, oh, that was very undemocratic and it was a big mistake. They would say, but our experts, they said it will work, and it didn't work. Blame the expert, don't blame the politicians. And that's the point, and I think we like, in some way we mislearned that, and it's quite interesting. I mean, this situation, you are sitting here with us, and we all have the feeling, yeah, something is really going wrong. Who's thinking now here about like what should be done? How do I participate myself into politics? Will I join a party or not? Will I do something about it? Probably not, and that's quite interesting too. We are sitting on the stage, we are watching, we have the first seats for watching the crisis. We are doing nothing about it, and that's quite interesting. Yeah, with the Pirate Party, we are doing things very pragmatic, but we are seeing at the moment we are a small thing in a very, very big system that can be.
But Krastev, let's put you on a much more pragmatic level. And the following: you have some months ago, Mr. Papandreou, difficult situation. The opposition is not supporting him. There is pressure from Brussels to go on the tough measures, and he said, "I want to go on the referendum."
Yeah, bold move.
On the other side, good idea from your point of view, participation. On the other side, can a small country like Greece decide the fate of the euro, in which there are some other countries present. Where are you going to stand on this? If it was for the Pirate Party, do you believe that Papandreou was right? Are you going to react differently than Mrs. Merkel did?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't want to be in the position of Angela Merkel, and that is, of course, quite interesting because we are always asked.
Being in position of Papandreou is also not good.
Yeah, but I mean, when it comes to the euro, I mean, Germany did a lot of things which weren't that good. I mean, you have this Euro Treaty, and in this Euro Treaty, it says there are no bailouts. It says nobody leaves the euro, and it says if somebody is not hitting the criteria, there will be measurements against that. And the biggest country of the eurozone, Germany and France, when they were not hitting the criteria, they advocated in Brussels and said, no, don't let this measures against us happen, so which didn't quite encourage the people to trust in this currency. If you don't follow the rules, and that's also a part of responsibility you self-made, and then discuss openly when you say nobody can leave the euro, or maybe Greece should leave the euro, then you come in a situation like this. I mean, that is not quite an answer which maybe is not a fruitful answer, but it's still a problem. So if you not follow your own rules, and then, yeah, you have something, situations like that now.
By the way, it would not have been a violation of the rules if Greece would have made a referendum. And I have to say that it was a very good idea to try to have such a referendum. Because if you are in a situation where you're under permanent protests from different vested groups, where you have a hostile opposition that is not ready to cooperate, and where on the other hand you have the pressure from the Brussels institutions and the financial markets, I think it's a very valid idea to say, okay, let's go to a decision and involve the entire population in a debate to where the country should head to. And the decision will be made by a referendum. This would have been an explicit legitimation for what the government intended to do. And whenever you have protests and whatsoever, and they say we do not like this measure and the other measure, then the government could have said, listen, we accept that you do not like it, but please accept that the majority of the population took an explicit decision that we are going that way. And therefore I did not understand why in Europe so many people in the political class were so hostile to that idea. By the way, Ireland is now doing a referendum too. Where is the uproar of all the other prime ministers who said Greece is not allowed to do a referendum? What do they say now concerning Ireland? They're all quiet. They're all quiet. And therefore, I think this was a missed chance. It was a missed chance because a country like Greece should have the chance to determine, do we want to continue with the euro, which anyhow will be a very, very tough way, and I'm not sure if it will succeed at the very end, or are we trying a different road, which is also not an easy exercise. But as they are mainly affected by the results of the decision, I think they have the right to take this decision.
Of course, just to make life slightly more complex, if I was a German taxpayer, I would basically say probably it's also right to have a referendum on Germany. Should we bail out Greece? And then you're going to end up with 27th referendum in the member states, and then European Union probably is going to look in a very difficult position. So I do believe we're facing choices. I very much, by the way, agree with your analysis. I do believe that there was overplayed this anti-Papandreou hysteria. But I want to go to Lilia and to Kati, because when you see how this crisis has been interpreted, starting already with 2008, there have been always two types of comparisons that were coming up. One was people have been comparing with the 30s, the Great Depression, this was very strong. And after that, there was the comparisons with the 1970s, which Lilia said that she explicitly studied for good reasons, because from psychological point of view, it was very close there. But I'll try to make an argument, and after that, ask your interpretation of this. If you see 1930s, major crisis of the trust in the market. The business community is mistrusted, nobody believes that market goes to equilibrium, but day by day, with the development of the crisis, you have a new consensus emerging. For good or for bad, the majority of the people and the policymakers start to trust the government. They do believe that the government, through planning and other interventions, can do better for the economy. And this was a very broad consensus. It was true for the Stalin's Russia, for the Hitler's Germany, for the New Deal in the US, for Keynes' Britain. There was a new consensus. In 1970s, the other way around. Both publics and the governments started more and more to mistrust the governments and their role in the economy. Basically inflation and all this that is happening, but you have a new consensus emerging. People start trusting the markets. They basically believe that the markets can produce growth, and from this point of view, moving the economy. What I found, probably it's a temporary conditions, very specific for this crisis, is that at least for now, on the last Davos summit, the results have been announced of the public opinion polls being done both on the level of the public but also on the level of the elites. And you have a situation in which market is not trusted anymore, but the government is not trusted too. The fact that the government saved some of the big banks did not help to get basically support for the government actions coming neither from the public nor from the business elites. And my idea is how you're going to comment on this, because I see this situation as a kind of important and interesting and different than the two comparative situation we're discussing, with probably, Kate, did you start with you?
Yes, I think it's easier to see the 1930s through these rose-colored glasses now than would have been the case if you'd been there. I published a book a couple of years ago called Who Cares, that looks back to the 1930s. And, you know, there was widespread skepticism and dissension over the role and capacity of government to deal with the Great Depression. There were vicious debates at the time. In fact, the first impulse, at least in the United States, when the Depression began, was austerity policies, very much like what we see now. And it was the failure of those austerity policies that opened up the door for Roosevelt to develop the New Deal. But it wasn't until the New Deal model began to actually show benefits through massive injection of public employment that you start to see this now historically resonant capacity of belief in government begin to be nurtured. The New Deal put unemployment down by half through direct government job creation. It was still very high, but relative to what it had been before New Deal policies took hold, it was an enormous improvement. So the lesson I derive from this is that citizens have faith in government when they see government taking action that works. And before that, they don't. In our own time, especially in the United States, as you pointed out, there's been widespread sort of disgust and disdain for government, followed by a complete collapse in faith in the elites and in money managers. But we now see that the actions taken to rescue the automobile industry in the Midwest are starting to work. There are now thousands of workers employed in the Midwestern auto factories. There are plants being repatriated from Mexico. And it is very difficult for conservatives in the United States to explain why in the world they voted against this policy. This policy worked. And it is the demonstration, if you will, of the success of government intervention that makes a difference in developing citizen confidence. But it has to be conceptualized and articulated in exactly those terms. And here I find the Democratic Party in the US a little bit uneasy with how to characterize the success of this intervention. There should be, in my opinion, a robust defense and affirmative argument about the capacities of government to intervene in market failures, that is specifically the role of government, and that it actually works. And we can see that it works, the Midwestern auto plants being the best example of this. So we missed opportunities over the last 20 or 30 years to point to those places in which government actually did make a difference and resuscitate citizen confidence by defining this exactly as it was. Similarly, here in Europe, I don't hear very much discussion about problems like persistent youth unemployment as a responsibility of the European Union to address as a matter of policy. You hear a great deal about deficits, about financial regulation, all of which, of course, has consequences for things like persistent unemployment, but where are the direct government policies and articulation of responsibility on the part of the European Union for this problem of youth unemployment? It is not possible, in my opinion, to sustain a democracy when you have thousands of people persistently outside the one institution that truly defines citizenship, and that is employment. If this goes on, we will have an entire generation here in Europe that has been disenfranchised and will not have faith in government. But if they understand that this is actually an obligation of government to address this problem, not simply the question of deficits, then there may be, what one can hope in the long run, some degree of return of faith in government. What returned faith in government in the US in the 1930s was the efficacious action of government that made a difference in resurrecting employment markets. And that, I believe, will actually be, if we're fortunate, the actual outcome of the American election this year. It will rotate around the capacity of government to have addressed this problem of persistent unemployment. So framing matters, and let's hope that will be the lasting legacy of the second Obama administration, since he won't be able to run again, which is to define the action of government as noble, as important, as responsive to citizen needs, and as the appropriate function of government in conditions of market failure. That was the great secret of FDR. It is the reason why he was elected 4 times. It is the reason why he was and remains the most revered president in the history of our country. So I think that we have to get beyond these purely economic arguments about regulatory matters and questions of liquidity and deficits, and get back to the things that matter the most to citizens, to families, and to households, which is how their people are employed, how they care for themselves, how they nurture the next generation. I think if we're able to do that, we will see a different attitude toward government reemerge. I think that's what's happening in the United States right now.
Here is the crucial question. To translate what you describe as the route to success in the United States, and I entirely agree, to get that working in Europe, we have to change some of the major perceptions, because there is a need that you do something against youth unemployment in Spain that has reached levels of 46% on an average. And there are parts of the country where the youth unemployment is 65%. But it will not be the Spanish government that will be able to address this issue, because they have to enter some austerity measures. There is no alternative for them. And the main issue now is that we, Germans, Austrians, Finns, all the surplus countries of the European Union, have to provide the funding for youth unemployment programs in large parts of the Mediterranean. And this is the huge difference with the United States of America. In the US, you have a single US government that can decide and embark on action against youth unemployment. In Europe, we do not have such a situation yet. But in substance, we have to arrive to such a situation, which has to start with a new solidarity in Europe that says, yes, we Austrians, we Germans, we Finns, we Dutch, we are ready to finance youth unemployment programs in Spain and Italy and other countries, because they can't.
Let me just say that I completely agree with you. This is actually the test of Europe.
Yeah.
Is Europe going to become a political entity in which the problems of its weaker states are the problems of all? That is actually the question.
Very much agree. And I want to go to the street of Moscow where the middle class went up. Because talking about the state and the market, I saw the poll being done by the Occupy movement people on Wall Street. And 53% of them are against raising the taxes. So I do believe in a certain way we have a totally new momentum with this street, where you have two different types of libertarianism clashing. On one side, you have libertarianism on the right, much more the Tea Party in the United States, which hates the state because the state redistributes, and basically it's a welfare state that creates welfare queens. On the other side, you have younger people, and some of them very much probably voting for the pirates, who basically also mistrust the state because they see the state these days very much as a security state. Abusing their rights, doing things here and there, they don't have the trust anymore. For me, it's very interesting because what happened in Russia, it's really amazing for everybody who has been following Russia. The people who you saw on the streets of Russia, normally you're going to see on the airports. These people never really liked Mr. Putin. They never have been part, most of them, of his camp, but they never believed that they can change anything in the country. So they were ready to leave the country instead of protesting. And then these airport people ended on the street. And for me, it's very interesting how the alternative works for them. All these questions that we're discussing in terms of America or European Union, because Russia is facing a kind of very similar question with one major kind of difference, that you cannot change even the guy.
Well, Ivan, it seems to me, well, first of all, Chris, can I tell the audience our secret? Maybe, this conference will be a kind of benchmark in our relationship with Germany, because we with Krastev decided definitely use the experience of organized Pirates Party in Russia. So I hope that the next year, we'll have the representatives of Russia's Pirate Party here. With respect to your question, even firstly, what we have in Russia, this is not the typical Marxist contest of social economic nature or, confrontation of the economic interests. This is the typical quest for dignity. And this is, well, if we use this Hegelian understanding, this is the quest for recognition of our rights for dignity. And definitely, this awakening at the beginning had nothing to do with social and economic roots, and you're absolutely right. But in order to become tsunami, it has to acquire social and economic foundation. And with respect to your question to our colleague, I'm just wondering, because the Davos poll with respect to Russia is absolutely correct. Because what we are going to have, and not only in Russia, my hunch is in the whole of the post-Soviet space, and definitely in China, because China is such a fragile entity with so many cracks already appearing. Well, what we are going to have, the national consensus on the basis of mistrust with respect to both market and the state. Because in our societies and in our civilization, those who own the country, they rule the country. That's why this national consensus is totally natural. So what could result out of this consensus? And here I'm looking at Mr. Chancellor. It seems to me that your double-way scenario, or two scenarios, in a different format, will be relevant for Russia. One scenario that will succeed in the next 5-6 years, because, well, it's difficult to sustain this kind of tension and drama and suspense for longer, will have political alternative and civilizational alternative. That maybe will preserve Russia in the current geographical format. And we'll simply skip over this 20 years of historical pause and difference and demoralization. But we cannot absolutely exclude the failure. That will be the failure of tremendous proportions that will fail to form political alternative. And Russia will look like Titanic looking for its iceberg, and will prove that, suicidal statecraft is possible, which means maybe a positive thing for you, because if you fail to find domestic internal incentives to sort out your things and, like Kathy said, to consolidate Europe as a political entity, then apparently the existence of our suicidal statecraft phenomena will help you to sort it out. This is a very nightmarish scenario. I just hope it will never happen.
No, I don't believe that Russia is going to be Titanic, because I don't see Mr. Putin easily in the role of Leonardo DiCaprio. But from this point of view, basically we had till now discussed, in my view, very clearly what should we fear, and also what we could hope for, and I do believe this is very important. My last question, and this I'm really going to expect your short answer, is what we can expect if we're trying to imagine the next 10 years. And we have this positive scenario and negative scenario. What do you really expect to happen? I recently was talking to a colleague of mine who is a historian of science. And she was telling me, listen, Ivan, if I see how strong and influential economists are these days, I can compare only with the astrologists in the 19th century, the same way they captured the imagination of the king. And he said, listen, and they're also very much alike. The forecasting power is similar, and both of them rely on their technical skills. So I don't expect this type of projections, but what do you really expect? For example, Mr. Chancellor, do you expect that the European Union is going to make it? Do you expect that this type of a very reasonable approach in which it's going to be the European Union that is going to gain the confidence and not simply the national governments, do you expect this being a reality in 10 years?
Yes. I think that Europe will get a single European balance sheet, which is the economic foundation for the political Europe. And I think it will be very clear that there is a huge interlinkage between the future destiny, for instance, of unemployed young people in Spain and salaries in Germany. And I think that there is enough political potential in the different countries that could turn into such a pro-European orientation. I mean, just referring to potentially positive events. I mean, time for incumbents is not easy at the moment. And one might like or not this mayor opposition in Slovakia that yesterday gained the absolute majority. But they were embarking on a very clear pro-European platform, which I think in days like that is quite a courageous exercise. I know other parties who would not be that courageous. And it seems that with a certain solidity of the pro-European argument in face of the challenges that we see, you can make the case. I remain bullish on Europe.
Thank you very much. Katie, I have a question for you, and my question is not, is Obama going to win these elections? My question is America going to go beyond this level of polarization after 5 or 10 years? How the Republican Party is going to look in 5 or 10 years? Because I don't believe it's enough for Obama to be reelected. What strikes the foreign observers is much more the level of polarization of the American political life, where you have that, this is slightly like in the film Cowboys versus Aliens.
I think prediction is a difficult enterprise. I would argue that we are watching the ungluing of the Republican Party right now. It's splintering into its many splendored forms, and we'll probably reap the consequences in the next election. But I think it will still remain the responsibility of the Democratic Party to show that it's vision and its policies address the entire spectrum of the American population, all the way from elites that have benefited from the extraordinary galloping growth of inequality, those of us who are in the top 1%, all the way down to those among the working poor. And I would say the same for Europe. In the end, Europe has to mean something positive for the unemployed youth as much as it does for those who are on the receiving end of the institutions that have integrated elites. If Europe only remains a benefit for those who are well-educated, who can move through the Erasmus integrating system, who are cosmopolitan at the top, then it will always be vulnerable to the reactionary elements that try to capture those who have been disenfranchised and see no benefit to Europe. The same thing will be true in the United States. And it is the burden of the Democratic Party to show that its policies will then address those who have been working away at the very bottom of the service sector industries and have seen very little benefit from the policies that have been so good for the other half of the country.
Thank you very much. Lilia, I know that the Carnegie Center in Moscow did a study on Russia 2020. So is this going to be a post-Putin Russia, or it's going to be post-Russia Putin?
Well, even frankly speaking, I'm not a fan of making predictions and forecasts and scenarios because, well, I do believe that all scenarios are rather based on our imagination and wishful thinking. So I hope that we have at least some probability, feasibility, in 10 years' time. It's difficult to go beyond 10 years' time for Russia being transformed. On the basis of one fact, we'll have new generation, people like Chris coming into the fore. So I believe in this generation. And secondly, definitely we'll have post-Putin's Russia, because the current generation that is ruling Russia, despite of the fact that still they will be in their 60s, 70s, yes, in their 70s, they will be out. They cannot stay long in their very turbulent country. And I can even imagine that at the next meeting in the theater, you'll have Mr. Putin sitting instead of me and discussing the issue of corruption and political and economic risks. So why not?
We're always ready to invite him. But Christopher, in 10 years, is there going to be a chancellor from the Pirate Party in Germany?
No, not a chancellor, but I guess the Pirate Party has now like 20,000 members in Germany, and we have like a critical mass that we won't disappear like from one to the other day. In 2013, we have the general election in Germany, and at the moment we are in the polls like between 5% and 9%, which is quite good. I mean, we have still to make a good campaign and to convince the people that it's good to have some fresh wind into the parliament. We have the election in Saarland, where we are at 5% in the polls at the moment. We are in Schleswig-Holstein in 7% at the moment in the polls. Yeah, it looks quite good for the Pirate Party. What I hope what happens in Germany and Europe is that more and more, younger people, an emergence of civil society, that the people start to reclaim their democracy, start to reclaim their society, that they make pressure in a way that the people in government start to see, okay, there is an alternative. Maybe I make an unpopular decision, but in our view, the right decision, in the view like with the referendum, in the view of the people, the right decision. It gets a hard time, but there is a glimpse. At the moment, it's just, we are trying to cope with the situation and don't know where there's the need of a vision. And I hope that the Pirate Party in Germany, but in other countries too, that we can work on such a positive vision, because we had here now a lot of this depressive analysis of the moment and not very visionary. And we should come back to that and the belief that politics and civil society can change something to the good.
Thank you very much. I have two very good news for Mrs. Merkel. One is that the Chancellor said that the European Union is going to make it, and that you expect that in 10 years you're not going to make it as a Chancellor. So this was...
We are a small party, I mean,
but, listen,
foreign minister.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for coming. Allow me very much to thank our panelists and our... Thank you. And don't forget, the reasons they were here was the Burgtheater, the Erste Bank, der Standard, and the Institute for Human Sciences. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.